All right. I think we're recording. Does it say record on your side?
It does. It says live.
All right, cool. So the title of this video is Fund Your Trust. I mean, God, this gives me a headache. When people go through all this work, right, Alex, and then they don't fund their trust. So first, I would like to introduce Alex Rodriguez. She's an estate planning attorney, yeah, and we don't have any business associations or anything like that. Everything that we're doing today, again, is strictly for educational purposes. We haven't taken your accounts or your situation into account. Is there any other disclosures we should add, Alex?
Yes, so we're not entering into any legal representation. This is strictly educational, like you said.
Yeah. So I get this question, or I see this often with clients have created, I call it like a fancy trust. It's like in this binder, it's on like their bookshelves. It looks amazing, but they never went through the process of actually funding a trust. So what? Maybe we start with this. Why is having a trust and it not being funded not enough?
Exactly. So I'm glad you asked that, because that's actually something I'm really passionate about. And when I am working with my clients, I'm like beating a dead horse. Like, I'm constantly repeating this. So I like to say that there's basically 2 steps when you're creating a trust. It's not just the fancy binder and the documents and all that you mentioned, which that's an important component, but that's only step 1. The second step is, once you have it created, and I think, Amar, you've seen my fancy little prop that I like to use.
Yeah.
I have this little jar. And so I like to use this as the prop and say, okay, this is your trust. You went on the pottery wheel and you created it, and it's all set and it's all pretty, but you don't want to just then set it on the shelf and never think about it again. Instead, what you're going to do, once it's created, it's barely step 1, you got to fund the trust. And when I say fund the trust, what I mean is, if this is your home, these are your house keys, you got to put it into the trust. And unless it's actually physically in the trust, your trust does nothing. It's not.
Yeah, it's not even in the trust.
It's not even in the trust. And that's so common, right? I don't know about you, Amar, but a lot of clients that I come who have a prior trust, they come to me and they have this fancy, pretty thing, and all of the assets are out here. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, and so beyond your house, there's got to be like bank accounts, investment accounts, and other things that have just you've never changed the title to the trust. So there's a couple ways of doing this, right? Like, I think there's a way that we can just title those accounts directly in the trust. Is that right?
Right. So there's basically 2 ways up the mountain. I always like to break it down into like at least 2 choices to give clients. So there's 2 ways up the mountain when you're funding a trust. And so basically the first way, which is the preferred way for a lot of attorneys, is you actually physically change the ownership and you put it inside of the trust. So that was the first way, the more preferred way. But a separate way of doing it is, you don't have the trust be the owner. Instead, you name the trust as the beneficiary, whether that's the primary beneficiary, a contingent beneficiary. And so a really good example for that would be life insurance policies, right? You already own the policy, but we need to make sure that upon your death, that policy gets funded into the trust. And so the easiest, best way of doing that is you actually name the trust as the beneficiary. And so upon your death, then that life insurance policy would get put into the trust. And that's where working with financial advisors is so important for estate planning attorneys, because we rely heavily on the advisor to assist the client as well in guiding them through this process. I mean, there's only so much we can do, because the client actually has to physically sign and do some of that legwork. And so it does become really important to have your team set up so that we're all communicating with each other and discussing, okay, what's the best way of titling it, whether it's actually changing the ownership or just changing the beneficiary.
Yeah, and it's hard. I can imagine it's hard to be in your position because you don't work at the institution. So, like, every bank has their own form. Every financial institution wants to see a certain way, like their certificate of trust. So, like, what's the best way to do this? Like, how would you suggest going down this process?
With your homework. So the best way of doing it is, so let's break it up into a few components. usually the attorney will be the one who helps their client with the house, right? So for a lot of individuals, like their home is a big ticket item. So the attorney should be helping you with that. So that's at least out of the way. Then the next step is going to be bank accounts, investment accounts, and then tax deferred accounts. We're going to leave tax deferred accounts off to the side, and that's probably a whole other video series. Yeah. So we'll just say like those need to be treated with like white gloves. So that's a whole different series there. But let's just focus on bank accounts and investment accounts and things like that. And so that's where it becomes really important. You should be talking with your advisor and your attorney to make a game plan, right? So it's kind of like you're on the football field. It's like, okay, these are all the assets. These are all the men on the field or women. And what are we going to do to like make sure that your desires and wishes, if something happens to you, are accomplished? And so basically we need to set up that game plan. And for bank accounts, the easiest way to do that is, honestly, it's go into your local bank and you're going to tell them, I just created a trust and I have a bank account with you, and I need you to help me change the ownership from my name into my name as the trustee of my living trust. And so then that at least gets the ball rolling, and the bank rep will hopefully let you know, okay, these are the things we need to do or that we need on our end to make that happen for you. And so one of the most common things that are requested is a certification of trust. And we're lucky, at least in California, there is a probate code that says that third parties like banks have to accept a certification of trust as proof of a trust. And so let me explain what that means and why is a bank asking you for this? Why can't you just like waltz into the bank and say, I have a trust, like please like change the ownership of it? And the reason is that they need proof that you actually have your trust in place. And so one way of doing that is you actually take that entire trust document and you hand it over to the bank and say, here it is, grab the information you need from that. But oftentimes people don't want to be sharing this very private document, and you don't have to, because in California, we do have a probate code that says banks have to accept what's called a certification of trust. So it's basically it's a couple-page document, and it basically lists all the primary things that a third party would need to know, like what the name of the trust is, who the people who created the trust are, who the trustees and the successor trustees are, is it revocable, is it not? So it provides all of that information. And so here's a trick question that often trips up my clients. And so if you're watching this, you're not going to get tripped up with this question. So if you're at your bank and the bank says, okay, great, we have your certification of trust, we know that you have a trust, and we know that you want to change the ownership of your bank account into the name of the trust, what is the taxpayer ID number of the trust? And I always get frantic calls from clients like, what is the number? I don't know it. And even though I repeat it so often, but like, here's the thing. So don't get tripped up on this. It's your social security number, because your trust is basically you. So it's revocable. It doesn't really exist for tax purposes or the IRS. And so it's you. And so when the bank asks you that, you're going to know the answer. It's your social security number. And so the bank hopefully will be able to assist you with getting that transferred in. So that's the first way, right, Amar? That would be the changing of the ownership of an account.
Yeah. So that certificate of trust document is so important.
It's extremely important. And so you really, if you do have your binder, your estate planning binder at home, that should be a document that you have a little sticky tab on, right? So that you'll probably be using that the most after you've created your trust, so that when you go to the bank, you're able to do all of those fine tuning of getting it changed into the trust. So that would be the change of ownership. But then the other way of doing it. So here's another tip. So oftentimes, our clients will ask me, well, I have my checking account, but I have all of my auto pay and direct deposits and everything set up with that. And the bank has informed me that if I change my account into the name of my trust, that I get a whole new bank account number and I have to start from scratch again and do all the direct deposits and auto pays. And that's a pain in the butt, and I'm not going to do my homework. So there it is. And so for that situation, what I tell clients is like, okay, even though my preferred method is that you actually change the ownership into the name of the trust, if in a situation where you're not going to do the homework because it's going to mess up all of your conveniences, that's fine. Leave it in your name, but then you're going to do plan B. Remember I said there's two ways up the mountain in terms of funding a trust. And so plan B is, instead of changing the ownership into the name of the trust, you're going to change the beneficiary. So little known fact, or maybe better known fact now, for accounts, you should be able to name what's called a TOD, a transfer on death, or a POD, which is a payable on death beneficiary for your account. And so what you can do, instead of changing the ownership, if you're not going to do it because it's just too much work and you don't want to change up the account numbers, is you're going to do a transfer on death or a payable on death. So you're basically naming your trust as the beneficiary of that bank account. And so we still accomplish the same purpose of, upon your death, it will get routed into your trust. But then here, and sorry, I might be digressing a little bit. I get really passionate about this. But so here's where it's really important. You need to have a complete estate plan, because if you choose plan B of just naming the trust as a beneficiary, if you're in a coma and you can't waltz into the bank to take money out of your account, now that it's not titled in the name of the trust, your trustee isn't going to have access to that. So that's where you need your financial power of attorney. So it's just, the takeaway here is it's really important. You need to have your comprehensive plan in place, because all of that comes into play when you're doing the funding of your trust. If you want to have greater flexibility of whether you're actually naming the trust as the owner or the trust as a beneficiary, you need to have like your entire tool set, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. That's great. So fund your trust.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. I'm constantly repeating myself on that. People are probably like so sick of hearing me say it, but it's so important and so true.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Alex.
You're very welcome.
All right.